Hi everybody! My name is Michelle the Bookworm, and in this week's video I'm going to be doing a book review from my 2018 Classic Literature Challenge. I read this book pretty recently, just about a week or two ago. It is... So I finished it on the 10th, and I finally wrote up a review for it, and it is the third book of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, The Return of the King. I actually read the entire book in less than a year, so that's pretty cool. I have absolutely fallen in love with this series. I just really love this series, and I'll go into more about what I loved about The Return of the King in particular in this video. So, just a brief overview of what happens in this book. The Return of the King is the final book of the Lord of the Rings trilogies, and it kind of follows the general trilogy. The third book kind of follows the general trilogy trope, which is that the third book is extremely action-based. It's got a lot of wars and battles in it, but in general, there's a lot of things that I really liked about this book. So, in The Return of the King is the final battle between good and evil over Middle-earth. It is the climax that the books have been leading up to. And in this one, Aragorn becomes more of a main character because he is the king that is returning. So he plays a bigger role. Frodo is obviously a pretty big role, but Merry and Pippin play a bigger role, which I will be talking more about later on in this video. So now Aragorn must rally forces in order to fight back against Sauron. And while that's happening, Sam and Frodo are trying to fight their way up to Mount Doom. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is what I thought was interesting about the book. So this isn't necessarily something that I liked or that I didn't like. It was just something that I thought was interesting. So I thought that the prophetic folklore in the series was really interesting. I wish that I could have noticed more in the previous books. As I mentioned before, the first book, I thought that there were a lot of prophetic stories that were happening, but I just didn't know enough to kind of tell that it was foreshadowing something. For instance, the King's Foil in this, in The Return of the King, the King's Foil prophecy, the fact that Aragorn asked for King's Foil, it's kind of like he knew he was the king, and he asked for King's Foil in order to heal the people who have been harmed in battle. So that was kind of cool, and it kind of old, agey. Sounds like something that you definitely hear in kind of like Beowulf's age. And it reminded me a lot of the Sword from the Stone. You know how King Arthur kind of like pulled the sword from the stone? Well, this time, the king healed his people. I also liked Legolas's song. Legolas' song also kind of like foretold the future a little bit, and how the lady had warned that if Legolas ever heard the sound of seagulls, that he'd never want to come home. That was kind of interesting, and Legolas did hear them, and he says that he's never going to stop hearing them in his head. I think he does go back though. if I remember correctly, so we'll see. I'm not sure if he stays. The third book is definitely the most graphic of the trilogy. Oh my gosh. I mean, I know it's the one with the major battles, but wow. For instance, the orcs fleeing the human heads over the wall in order to scare the armies of Gondor. Wow, that I was not expecting that. That seemed pretty barbaric. Um so those are the parts that I thought were interesting. I'd now like to talk about the parts that I liked about the book. I I really loved the natural imagery. Tolkien does such a fantastic job. I've never read an author who does such a great job incorporating the natural imagery of the world into their story. For instance, at the Battle of Pelennor Fields, I'm probably saying that wrong, but during that battle, there's like this war going on in the sky itself. Everything is just described as green and gray, like dark and light are fighting against each other. And while everything's just covered in this black cloud and there's lightning everywhere, whenever something happens, like Gandalf comes and this ray of light just shines. And it's very interesting to kind of watch how the nature is fighting as well over the future of Middle Earth. And I don't know, I really like that, and I like how it's just a constant battle and you can almost you kind of want to rely on nature to foreshadow a little bit, but I was also kind of wondering if possibly relying on nature too much for that is kind of a way for Tolkien to kind of trick the reader. I'm not sure. I also like the contrast of the major cities actually inside nature. I don't know why, but it's definitely so it contradicts Mordor's idea of to make a city for and to make a city you have to destroy what was already there. No, the like Gondor built a city inside nature itself, and it was kind of like as if it was always just a part of it. And I really like that idea. I kind of wish that we'd do that a little bit more today, but I just thought that that was really cool, and it kind of showed that nature was also, because they were willing to be a part of nature, that nature in many ways kind of aided them a lot too. Another thing of natural imagery that I really liked was the tree of Gondor, and it like and how it blossomed for certain people, like when Gimli and Aragorn and Legolas came waltzing into Gondor, the tree like blossomed. I'm not sure if it was just for Aragorn or if it was before the trio. I'd like to think it was for all of them. Like they all knew that some awesome people just came in through the door. Another thing that I really liked that came from previous books was the reoccurring theme of challenging stereotypes. I talked about this a lot in the first one because it was just so like inspiring for me, and I'm really glad to see it throughout this story. But this time we're focusing more on the hobbits. Merry and Pippin are halflings, and they actually play a much bigger role in this story than I feel like they did in the books. Or not in the books, but the movies. So, Merry and Pippin have actually staked like a kind of place within the world of men in the third book. Merry is with Theoden, who rides into battle. So Merry is the squire of Theoden, who rides into battle with Dernhelm, who's really Éowyn. So it's kind of cool how they're working alongside these humans. And Pippin pledges allegiance to Denethor and basically becomes his right-hand man throughout the battle as well. So I think that that's kind of interesting to see how hobbits kind of played a role as like the right-hand man of men. Another trope that I noticed is that hobbits are constantly overlooked. This happened all the way back to The Hobbit, from the first one to the second first book from The Hobbit to the Fellowship to the Two Towers. Hobbits are constantly being overlooked, where Merry is even overlooked on the battlefield, which probably saves his ass in the long run. And Frodo, Sauron automatically thinks that man has the Ring of Power, doesn't even conceive that anybody would want to destroy it, that everybody just wants to use it. No one thinks about this little halfling that could possibly be walking into literally doom. At this point, I would like to discuss my favorite characters, because I do have favorite characters. My first one, so I have two. I have two favorite characters in particular. The first one is Éowyn. She is just a badass. She does not take no for an answer. She is told that she can't go with Aragorn, and instead dresses as a man and rides off into battle. Which, okay, now that I say it that way, that sounds a little bit stalkerish. But that's still really cool that she dressed up as a boy, rode into battle, picked up Merry, and takes him with her. And she's just kind of a badass. And she slays the freaking Nazgul, the Lord of the Nazguls. She destroys him. So, that's really cool. But my absolute favorite character in all of this entire series has got to be Sam. Sam is such a badass. He is the unsung hero of this entire story. He supports Frodo, basically Frodo at this point, he's a pack mule, right? And that's completely understandable. This ring is, torn up his soul. It's completely eaten who he is, his memories. He's just in this pit of despair. And Sam is encouraging him, carrying him through. He even offers to take the ring, but Sam is just a trooper and a true friend in all of this. He is a legendary warrior, he is a fierce friend, and he carries Frodo up the mountain so that he can help bear the burden. He has a heart of gold, and he's amazing for that. I also like that Legolas and Gimli are still really good friends, and people are still looking at them weirdly because they're an elf and a dwarf, and they're best friends. And that's another thing that's kind of a reoccurring theme, that they're challenging the stereotypes. Elves and dwarves are not supposed to be friends with each other, and yet here they are. They're singing, they're talking together, and having a good time. One thing that the Lord of the Rings trilogy is known for is for their interesting artifacts, and there definitely were some in this story as well, though not quite as many interesting ones as the first one. First, there's the Seeing Stone, which Saruman used to see the future. But as we learn in the story, it only shows half-truths. It shows part of the future. It's not clear at all, and Denethor was actually driven mad by this artifact because all he saw was everyone's impending doom. Another interesting artifact that I thought was really vital to the story was the Vial of Galadriel, which is the water from the Lady's Fountain, which Sam used to ward off Shelob, as well as kind of give Frodo some hope as he's carrying this heavy burden. It helped him feel a little bit lighter while he was walking up Mount Doom. It was just a beacon of hope that they could carry through Mordor. Another interesting artifact that I thought was really, really important, especially at the end, is Sam's gray dirt that he got. Another gift from the Lady. All these artifacts are like major gifts from the Lady. And it's interesting how she could foresee what he would need it for. And if it weren't for Sam, the Shire would not have been able to regrow. And I love how Sam is just this nurturing character. It's literally his character is to just give support and rebuild and regrow. And I love that his gift, that he used his gift from the Lady to help rebuild the Shire. Now, I didn't love everything about the Return of the King. There are very few books that I like 100%. The first thing that I don't really like about The Return of the King is, and it's probably just Tolkien's style of writing, is because there are so many point of view changes, there are a lot of cliffhangers. And for me as a reader, I'm sure you did that on purpose to kind of keep you intrigued, but for me I kind of found it frustrating because it kept switching way too much on whose point of view it was. For instance, we leave Pippin, and it wasn't just about the cliffhanger, it's that we never came back to the cliffhanger. We left Pippin on the battlefield, possibly dead, under an orc, and we don't hear about him until after the fact. We leave Frodo passed out in the middle of a lava river on a rock, and we hear after the fact what happens. You spend all this time, this is what kind of has me confused. Tolkien spends all this time describing these beautiful landscapes, pages upon pages upon pages. He can't take one page to describe, like, maybe there's a shadow of a eagle coming out of the sky. He can't take one freaking page to kind of, like, show that this isn't impending doom. Seriously? And then it's all just crammed into, like, this one happy meeting. Oh, what happened to you? Oh, Gimli pulled me out from under that orc. What a great pal. Come on. I don't know. It seemed like there was, like, such a climax. And then the end was just... So, that's kind of my opinion of it. Another thing that I really... And this is probably going to be a very controversial opinion. Another thing that I didn't really like about The Return of the King is probably the king himself. I don't really like Aragorn's character in this book. He seems very... And possibly it's just how everyone else treats him. He's very Jesus-y. Everyone really idolizes him, almost to the point where he's like a god. And he's just too perfect. It's that he has that ungrateful, oh, well, I'm only a king because I must, like, really overly humble aspect about him that seems so honestly fake. I I don't know if it's been overdone, or I don't know, it just doesn't seem genuine. I like characters who have flaws to them, and Aragorn just doesn't really seem to have that many flaws. I'm sorry, he's very boring, in my opinion. And Legolas says, like, everyone who knows him loves him, that, I don't know, he's just a drama queen, too. That entrance that he does in Gondor when he, like, hides as Gandalf's friend, it was completely obvious who was under there. Like, I don't see why anybody else was surprised. He's constantly with Gandalf anyways. Gandalf doesn't really travel with very many people. Like, I don't know. It it just seems a little over the top. Uh, Another thing that I didn't really like about the book was the eagles at the end. I feel like the eagles, like, again, we were told after the fact, but I feel like the eagles coming in at the very, very end was kind of a cop out. They arrived just in the nick of time to save the day. And my biggest question is, and I've heard this question asked before, and I really hope that there's an answer. Why couldn't they have just dropped the ring in the Mount Doom themselves? Does anybody know this? If you do know this, please leave a comment in the link in the description below. Because why couldn't they have just done it and saved this poor hobbit some trouble? This is a huge, giant plot hole. Is it because Sauron would have noticed? You know, a giant eagle flying around and dropping off the ring? Is it because they just didn't want to be involved? Which, if that's the case, then they're giant douchebags, because all of Middle-earth would have been destroyed. It was just a huge plot hole that I really, like, I feel like it should be filled, because that could have saved Frodo and Sam a whole lot of trouble. Poor Frodo. And Sam. Another thing that I don't like particularly about the ending, what happened to the Ents? Yeah, they didn't find the Entwives. They died, didn't they? You're not gonna tell us? We're just gonna assume? Okay. Well, that's really disheartening, because they were some of my favorite characters from the previous book, and I don't even get to hear what happened to them. That is not fair and very frustrating. So, I know I said a lot. As an overview, the things that I really liked about this book is kind of the same as the other books, and it's that I loved the natural imagery, that the stereotypes are being changed, that people are getting to know each other. I really like the interesting artifacts and just the folklore that was kind of integrated into everything. But there is a lot to be desired in thinking about the novel as a whole. I really don't like how the scene changes left at cliffhangers. I don't like Aragorn as a character. I'm sorry, guys. And I think the Eagles was a huge, giant cop-out. That being said, I have actually given this a great deal of thought, and I'm ready to give my final rating for The Return of the King. Oh, I'm shaking my camera. Got too excited. So, after much consideration, I have given The Return of the King a pretty high rating of 4 out of 5 stars, or an 8 out of 10. I still Tolkien really still just took me away with his natural imagery. He's an amazing writer, as I'm sure many of you already know. And I gave it a higher rating than The Two Towers. There was a lot about The Two Towers I didn't really like. It was just a lot of suspense, and maybe I just don't like that anxiety. But honestly, I loved the first one the best, probably because it had more natural imagery. And that's really what got me hooked. Out of the three of them, I really liked The Fellowship the best. But again, that's just me. Overall, my thoughts of the series is that I'm kind of sad that it's over. It's really cool. This is my first time reading it. There's definitely a whole lot to be picked and gleaned from it, but it feels like the end of an era. I finally finished and read all of the Lord of the Rings. I'm very proud of myself right now. I love it. I'm sad that it's over, but I'm going to have a lot of fun gleaning over it and just really picking it. Actually, probably now I'm going to go read the Silmarillion and read everything that I missed. So, at the end of every video, I do some questions. So, my question, actually I have two questions for this video, is who is your most or least favorite character of the entire series? And what artifact did you find was the most useful or the best for whatever reason? Feel free to answer those or any comments about my video down below. And if you have opinions that contradict mine, great. Feel free to talk to me about them. If you have any other comments about my videos, please feel free to comment. I'm really sad. It's the end. It's not the end, but it's the end for now. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me on this epic journey through Middle-earth. It definitely won't be my last one. And I will see you in the next video. Bye!